Hi Dragonflies, welcome back to Dragonfly Spirit Studio. I'm Lynn Bauer. This is the paint along video for Project 2 in my online course in painting skies and clouds in watercolor. If something in this video isn't clear to you because you missed an earlier video in the series, you don't have to search all over YouTube to find them. You can just go to my website at dragonflyspiritstudio.com and click on the links for Learn and then Watercolor Skies and Clouds. I've put all the lesson and project videos out there in order as they're released. And there are templates for you to work from doing the projects, reference photos, cheat sheets and handouts, information about supplies and materials. Everything that you need to do the course is all there in one place. Before we actually begin on our painting, I want to address something about studio practice and learning from videos. So in Project 1, I pointed out that if you're not careful, you can unconsciously assume that the painting should take about the same length of time as the video. And of course, I edit out a lot of drying time and the middle parts of washes and waiting for things to move with gravity or capillary action. So of course, the actual painting takes much longer than the video. But if you're not careful, you'll unconsciously think you should be done by now and start rushing and wreck things. Another thing you might unconsciously assume by watching my videos is that I normally sit down to paint, and that's not true. I normally stand up to paint. Unless I'm painting something about this big, I'm standing up, and sometimes even when I'm doing that, because I don't want this to be my full range of motion. I want to be able to use my entire body, especially if I'm tipping a page and running paint around or laying a wash on a larger area. If I have my whole body available to me, I can move in a more fluid and relaxed way. And I can also see things from a little bit of a distance and take in the whole painting instead of just a little tiny area. And that helps me not overwork things. When you see me sitting down on the videos, that's purely because I've got a lot of cables running around me, and I have been known in the past to knock down the lights, the camera, the microphone. So if I can do it on the smaller demonstrations, I try to sit down just to kind of keep myself from moving too much and knocking things down. But in my normal studio practice, I want to be able to stand up and move freely. So I encourage you to try doing the same and see if that makes a difference in the character of your brush strokes and the amount of enjoyment and relaxation that you feel while you're painting. As we discussed in the Project 2 planning video, we'll use a variety of techniques to paint the clouds in this painting. In this upper area, I'm going to drop in the cloud colors after misting the area with a spray bottle to get that sparkle of the light coming around the edge of the clouds. In this lower area, I'm going to use a gum Arabic Resist. I've already masked the surf area with masking fluid. Even though it's not fully white, I'll tint that area later, but I do want the harder edged shapes to give that area some definition. Next, let's use gum Arabic to preserve the soft-edged highlight on the lower edge of the clouds behind the rocks. If you're not sure how to do this, you can see the lesson video on preserving soft-edged highlights with the gum Arabic Resist. After we let our gum Arabic dry completely, we're ready to lay our wash, and I always begin by making sure I have everything that I need close at hand before I start laying a wash. And in this case, we'll also want some spray bottles because we're going to use the third technique from our negative painting lesson and create the upper part of the clouds after misting the paper so that we get that kind of sparkly light in between the clouds. I've mixed two washes with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. One is a somewhat cooler, bluer gray, and the other is a warmer gray. And I noticed when I was watching this video after I made it that my camera picks up ultramarine blue very strongly, and these washes look a lot bluer on the video than they do in real life. So keep that in mind as you're watching this video. And of course, you might use other pigments entirely to mix your grays, or you might decide to be more bold with your color and have fun with the color. It really doesn't matter. This particular design is really carried by the values, the lights and darks, much more than the color that you use. As I do the initial wash for the upper section, I want the water to flow off the upper corners and create that arc. So I'm actually going to turn the entire piece around so that I can prop up the far end so that the excess water will run away from the lights I'm trying to preserve and towards me where I can control things a little better. So the first thing that I'll do is use my spray bottle and create a pattern of droplets. Remember, we're spraying just a little bit so that we get droplets of various sizes instead of an even mist. And now I'm just going to wet everything above that where I want to eventually come back and make my darker clouds, so that if any color does run up into that upper portion, it will just fade out and blend into the clouds that I add later. And now I'll begin dropping in some color into the area that I've sprinkled with water. And I'm trying to just sort of get the character of the shapes in the sky and suggest the darker areas in the clouds and skip around some of those lighter areas. I'm not trying to reproduce exactly what's going on in the photograph, just get the character of that sky. And I think it might even be good while we're working on this corner to turn it so that everything is running towards the corner, and that will help us maybe preserve the type of light shapes that we see in the photograph. And as I'm doing this, I like to occasionally pick things up and use gravity to help me move the paint and get a sense of light bouncing around. And if if the sprinkles are drying too much in a particular area, with something like this, I don't mind spritzing again, even if it might create some small blooms, because that will all work just fine into this random sort of sparkly, broken up section that I'm trying to create right now. So here's where we are after our first wash, and now it's time to let things dry, and then we'll come back and do the lower section of our sky. Okay, so our first wash is now completely dry. And I'm going to again use little droplets right along the edge, the lower edge of that arc, so that where my lower clouds connect into my upper clouds, I'll keep that same character of that sort of sparkly edge that we get. And then I'm going to wet this lower portion of the sky and turn things so that I can do one side and let the paint run towards me. Now, still working with my lighter, more neutral gray, I'm going to start dropping in the upper edge of that bank of clouds, but because I've got the page turned sideways, gravity is helping me create that more linear, flat bottom of the clouds that we see. And I can pay attention mostly to getting the type of edge that I'd like to meet with my upper portion of the sky. And then once I have that edge the way I want it, I can come back in and drop in some streaks of darker color, just as there are in the clouds, and let that run and create that soft variation of color in the underside of those clouds. And again, I'll use gravity to help me move the paint and get the type of shapes that I'd like to see. At this point, you can see some of the color running down into the area that's going to be behind the rocks, but notice that those white highlights that will be at the base of the cloud have been preserved by our gum Arabic Resist. And now let's just drop in a little bit of our darker color along what will be the base of that cloud above our highlight to help the highlight even stand out a little bit more. And I think I'll use a thirsty brush to also lift a little bit of the lights that you see sort of separating the cloud layers, give my clouds a little bit of definition. So as you can see at this point in the painting, we've used several different ways to preserve or recover lights. We had our sprinkle and mist method of negative painting. We have some masking fluid in the lower part. We've used a gum Arabic resist, and we're using a little bit of thirsty brush. So it's not a matter of picking one method or another when you do these techniques. It's often a matter of combining several to get the look that you want in different areas of the painting. This also helps keep your painting from looking gimmicky, where the technique that you used sort of dominates the painting instead of the scene that you're trying to depict. Using a multitude of techniques means that no one technique really jumps out at you as much as if you use only one technique for your clouds in the entire painting. Now at this point, we could go on and start working on the other side of the sky, because we'll still be tipping things in kind of a side-to-side fashion. But I think I would rather wait and do the other half after I let things dry. I just feel like I might wind up causing some blooms, and I'm liking what I have so far, so I'm going to let this dry. Once everything's dry, we'll turn things around and we'll basically do the same techniques that we just used to do the arc on the other side of the sky. So I've spritzed that curved edge, and then I'll just wet everything else so that any paint that runs anywhere else will just flow softly into the areas around it. And I just want you to notice that I'm actually wetting all the way down the page and up on the other side. There's very little chance that paint's actually going to go there, but this way I have a lot of confidence that I'm not going to accidentally create a hard edge that I have to come back and soften somehow when I want to be focusing on creating this much more important edge where these lower clouds join the upper clouds and the light is breaking through. And as before, once I have my edge figured out, I'm going to drop in some darker color and let it run to create those darker bases on the clouds. And then I'll use gravity to help me move the paint around, and again we'll let everything dry before we continue. As I move into the lower section and create the cloud reflections on the beach, I'm going to use the same technique that I used in Project 1 to mist the edge, the lower edge of the clouds, so that any paint that runs up from the ocean and beach reflections will create a soft edge there at the top. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you haven't seen Project 1, you might want to watch Project 1 and see how we handled the tree line area before you attempt this project. And then I'm just going to wet everything on the lower portion of the page. And as I'm doing this, I notice that I forgot to mention that I also have a few little squiggles of mask down there in the foreground to suggest some little reflections on ripples in the water right at our feet. And I didn't point those out earlier, so I'll just mention those now. So now I'm just dropping in my little bit darker, cooler blue and letting everything run. I've gone right over my surf zone because we masked the surf so that we'll preserve our light highlights on the surf. And then otherwise, I just want to tone this entire lower area. And you can see this mask at the bottom a little better now where it's resisting the paint and making it flow around. And I'm just going to allow that to happen. As I get over on the left side of the beach, I am going to leave a little bit of light there to give me the light that will be peeking out in between my rocks, the reflections that will be peeking out in between my rocks. But otherwise, I want the entire beach to have this tone. We want to make sure that the sky is the lightest portion of the painting, with the exception of possibly a few little reflections on the beach. And now on the left side, which is the darker side of the beach, I'm going to add a bit more color. And then we'll use gravity to help us run the paint around and create some of the shapes and the way the light might be falling through this landscape. And just as we did with the sky, as things begin to dry a little bit and the paint is moving a little less, we can come back in and drop in some darker color and sort of restate the areas that we'd like to have be a bit darker. But do keep an eye on how things are drying. If anything is starting to dry and you're worried about getting blooms, you can always come back and do this in another layer. After that layer dries, I've decided that the right side is not dark enough yet. The clouds are not dark enough there. So I'm going to add another layer on that side. So I'll use my spray bottle once again to sort of mist the area around where I'm going to lay in my additional color. And then I'll simply drop in some more color to darken that area. Now, because I'm adding more color to the sky here, I'll also want to add some more of this darker tone to the foreground reflections. So I'll begin with the same color I used in the sky right under the surf zone. And then as I move towards myself, I'm going to add some burnt sienna because warmer tones appear to be more in the foreground closer to us. So this will help create a sense of depth. I don't want to risk having these darker colors run too far over onto the other side, so I think, again, I'm going to let things dry before I flip it around and do the other side of the foreground. As I look at this after it's dried, I realize that I have done everything I need to do in terms of creating the sky around my light highlights and in my surf, and I feel like I need to get those whites uncovered so I can use them to judge my values. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the gum arabic at this point. As you're doing this, remember it's water that dissolves the gum arabic, and so you have to wet it and blot a little off and then wet it again and blot some more off. Don't be in too much of a hurry and start scrubbing and damaging your paper. And then over here on the other side, we used masking fluid to mask our surf, so we'll use rubber cement pickup to remove that. Now, that bright highlight on the base of the cloud where the gum arabic was, we want to have bright white, but this surf is way too white. So the first thing we're going to do is just knock that back, tone it back with a little bit of the blue that's around it. So I just diluted a little bit of that sky wash, and I'm just going to come right over all of this so that everything gets tinted with that bluish gray. And then as long as I have my flat brush here, I think I'm going to lift a little bit to suggest that edge of foam that runs up on the sand after the waves break, mostly to create a little pathway to lead the eye. And then while this is still wet, let's drop in here and there a little bit of shadowing along some of these waves. Now it's time to start adding in our rock formations, and I'm going to switch to using my regular palette at this point so I can mix a variety of colors. Remember, in our planning video, we talked about how you see more color in this scene when you're standing in the scene than actually in the photograph. And these particular formations are primarily sandstone, and they've got a very nice warm tone. So I want to be able to mix that warmer tone. And I know that you can't see it anymore, but I am just following my pencil lines now, laying in my color where I had outlined my rock formations from my template. And I'm just letting these areas that were being hit more by the light and had that warmer color be a little bit warmer, and the areas that are in shadow on the side close to me a little bit cooler. And I'm just going to come right on down and start laying in my reflections as well. And just a reminder at this point, as you're watching this, remember I've edited out a lot of things, as you can see here. So don't get in a big hurry. Take your time and do things at a comfortable pace. And just as I did with the clouds, I'm going to come back while everything is still wet there in the reflections and the rocks, and throw in some of my darker areas and let them just softly blend. While those reflections are still somewhat wet, I'm going to just take some clear water, and here and there I'm going to soften those edges and let some of that paint run. And I'm going to use my flat brush as a thirsty brush to just lift a few light highlights on the ripples in the reflections. I'm also going to take my flat brush, just a damp flat brush, and drag it over some of the rocks to create just a suggestion of some of the striations that are in these rocks. And I'll also take a little darker gray and just kind of dance my brush around in the shadows a little bit and create a little bit of texture of the rubble at the base of these rocks. Now that I have the rocks in and can judge my values a little better, I think I still want the clouds on the right side of the painting to be a bit darker, so I'm going to restate that area again, just add a little bit more color in the same way that we did before. So I misted the edges of the area with my spray bottle, and now I'm just dropping in some of the darker shadows on the underside of those clouds. So we're now in the danger zone on this painting where I can wind up taking something that actually is fairly nice as it is, and I could wreck it at this point because I've decided that I would like the foreground to be a bit darker yet so that the attention is thrown more up into the sky. So I'm going to take a risk and add some more color down in the foreground and let it run down and darken the entire foreground area except the reflections. You could decide that you're happy with this at this point and you don't want to take that chance, but I'm going to. Now, down here at the bottom, I'm feeling like I'm getting an awful lot of dark color collecting there, so I think what I'm going to do is take my spray bottle and encourage it to move, but to leave some little sparkly lights for me, so that I don't wind up with a really, really dark area in the foreground. So hopefully this will suggest a little bit of a reflection of that arc of lighter clouds in the upper part of the sky. I'm also going to do a little bit more thirsty brush and just lift out a little bit of the lighter highlights. As I was standing in the scene, I felt like I could see a little bit more of the ripples in the water than I'm seeing right now, and I think I'd like to suggest a little bit of that. Again, this is kind of a way of sort of providing some subtle ways to move the eye around the painting without being too terribly obvious about it. This definitely is in the stage of taking some risks of starting to fiddle with things that I should leave alone. So I'm always sort of torn when I do this sort of thing. And I do mess things up and wish I would have left them alone sometimes. But that's how you learn how much you want to do and when you want to stop, is by making the mistake of going a little too far. So if that happens to you, don't freak out. Just make a mental note next time to restrain yourself a little bit more. I also decided that I wanted to add just a little bit more darker value in the foreground and suggest a little bit of those close reflections. So I wet the foreground area, and now I'm just using my wash brush to drop in the suggestion of some darker areas in the close water. And I also decided that the shadows in some of my waves had spread out a little bit too much, so I'm going to go back in and restate some of that. I've wet this area, and now I'm just dropping a little color in under these closer breakers. This also is in the category of it could be just fiddling and maybe I should just stop. So, it's a matter of taste at this point, whether you want to keep doing this kind of stuff. It could be the adjustment that makes the painting stronger, or it could be the adjustment that takes things too far. And the only way that I know of that you learn what your preference is there is to do it and go overboard sometimes, and then take that into account the next time. Okay, I do kind of feel like I'm getting into fiddling mode, so I am going to take a moment and remove the masking fluid from these foreground ripples, and then I'm going to stand it up somewhere in my house and just live with it for a little while and see if anything is catching my eye requiring an adjustment. That's a good way for me to make these final decisions about adjustments, is to just leave it in the house where I'll see it at different times of day in different lighting. And then if something continues to catch my eye in an annoying way, then I know I need to make an adjustment. In this case, the only adjustment I think I need to make after sitting with it for a while is to soften these light areas in the foreground. And what I'm doing is just brushing them over with a damp brush, which moves a little bit of the color around them and knocks back that white just a tiny bit so it doesn't grab people's attention and bring it too far into the foreground. So I think I'm going to call this done. I'm pretty happy with it, and I just wanted to show it to you in a photograph using a camera that I can color balance a little better so you can see that it's not quite as blue or as dark as it appears on the video. I apologize for that. I wish I had a way of lighting things so that it showed the color and values a little more accurately in the video. But in order to have you be able to see where things are wet and dry, I have to set things up in such a way that the color reproduction isn't always as good as I would like. So here it is, finished in a photo so you can see the colors and the values more accurately. And congratulations for making it all the way to the end of this video. Off you go to try Project 2. Good luck and have fun with it.